Welcome to Heartfelt Revenge Stories. My name is Sophia, and I am 25 years old. I need you to stay with me through this because what I'm about to tell you, it still doesn't feel real. Even now, sitting here trying to find the words, my hands won't stop shaking. So please bear with me. The day my mother died, I didn't just lose her. I lost the version of myself that had always felt safe in this world. You know that feeling when you're a little girl and your mom is in the next room, and even if everything outside is scary and loud and confusing, you feel okay? You feel protected? That feeling. I lost it the second the doctor walked out of that hospital room and didn't have to say a single word. I already knew. I looked at her face and I already knew. Grief is supposed to feel like sadness. That's what people tell you. They say you'll cry, you'll miss her, you'll get through it. But my grief didn't feel like sadness. It felt like being erased. Like someone had taken a giant brush and slowly painted over everything that made me me. The house I grew up in, the house where she tucked me in and sang off-key lullabies and made hot chocolate on rainy evenings, that house suddenly felt like a stranger's home. The walls were the same. The furniture hadn't moved. But something invisible and enormous had changed. People arrived. So many people. With casseroles and quiet voices and arms that hugged too long. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know what else to do. And honestly, neither did I. But you know what I noticed through all of it? My father didn't cry. Not once. He shook hands with relatives. He nodded at the right moments. He accepted condolences with a composure that people probably mistook for strength. But I was watching him. I was watching him the way only a grieving daughter watches the one person left who is supposed to hold her world together. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't strength. It wasn't even numbness. It was something colder. Something that made the hairs on my arms stand up even in a room full of warm bodies. He had already moved on. From a tragedy that hadn't even finished happening. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Because what happens next? I need the whole world to hear it. The funeral came and went like a slow, terrible dream. I remember standing at the graveside, clutching my mother's favorite green scarf. I had found it folded neatly on her bedside table, and I couldn't leave it behind. It still smelled like her, like lavender and something warm I could never quite name. Standing there holding that scarf, I told myself at least I still have a home. At least I still have that. That belief lasted less than 24 hours. The morning after the last guest left, my father called me into his study. Not with warmth. Not with the voice of a man who had just buried his wife and was reaching for his only daughter. He called me with a tone so formal, so deliberately measured, that my stomach clenched before I even reached the door. He was sitting behind his desk when I walked in. He didn't look up immediately. He was studying a stack of papers like they were the most important things in the room, and I suppose to him they were. When he finally looked at me, there was no softness in his face. No trace of the man who had once taught me to ride a bicycle in the driveway of that very house. He didn't ask me to sit down. He just started talking. He talked about the house. About assets. About ownership and responsibility and control. He used words that belonged in a boardroom, not a living room. Not a conversation between a father and a daughter who had just lost everything. I stood there trying to follow what he was saying, trying to make sense of the language he was using, when suddenly a sentence cut through all of it like a blade. Find somewhere else to live. Your mother isn't here to protect you anymore. I think I stopped breathing. I genuinely think my lungs just stopped. There was no anger in his voice. No guilt. No hesitation. He said it the way you'd read a clause in a contract. Just fact. Just cold, devastating fact. I waited. Some part of me, the part that was still very much a little girl who believed fathers didn't do things like this, waited for him to take it back. Waited for a laugh that would tell me this was some horrible joke I wasn't understanding. Waited for any flicker of humanity to crack through that composure. Nothing came. Instead, he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were bank statements, property documents, numbers printed in black ink that meant nothing to me in that moment except one thing. He was treating my mother's entire life, every sacrifice she had made, every year she had spent building something for our family, like a business acquisition. $33 million. Our home. Her legacy. Is now apparently. I tried to speak. I really did. I tried to remind him that I lived there, that I had grown up there, that my mother would never have wanted this. But grief had hollowed out my voice, and he dismissed every word with a wave of his hand. A single wave. Like I was a fly he was too tired to swat properly. In that moment I understood something that broke me in a way the funeral hadn't. To him I was not his daughter. I was a loose end. I went upstairs and packed 2 suitcases. 2. A whole life reduced to 2 suitcases. I moved through my bedroom like I was sleepwalking, pulling things off shelves and out of drawers without really seeing them. But when I passed my mother's room I stopped. I stood in the doorway and I couldn't move. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. A half-finished cup of peppermint tea sat on her dresser, dried now, forgotten. A bookmark still held her place in the novel she would never finish. Oh, how I cried in that doorway. Not quietly. Not politely. I cried the way you only cry when you think no one can hear you. Ugly and gasping and completely undone. Then I picked up her green scarf, added it to my suitcase and walked out of the house. The staircase where she used to wait for me after school. The kitchen where we burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings and laughed so hard we cried the good kind of tears. The front door she had painted herself one summer. A warm yellow she said reminded her of hope. I left all of it behind. I stepped outside into a world that felt completely indifferent to the fact that my life had just collapsed. And I had absolutely no idea where I was going. Stay with me, because what comes next changed everything. If you're just joining this story, go back and start from part 1. You'll need to know where Sofia has been to understand where she's going. Nights on other people's couches have a particular kind of loneliness to them. It's not the discomfort of an unfamiliar pillow or the sounds of a strange house settling in the dark. It's the awareness, heavy and inescapable, that you are existing in a space that was never meant to hold your grief. Friends were kind. Genuinely, truly kind. They offered blankets and tea and the kind of careful conversation that walks around the real subject because no one knows how to step into it without sinking. But kindness, as beautiful as it is, doesn't erase humiliation. And I was humiliated. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I had been made to feel like I had. My father's words followed me everywhere. Into every sleepless hour. Into every quiet moment when the noise of other people's normal lives faded, and I was left alone with the echo of a voice telling me to find somewhere else to die. Haha, I know. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how does a person laugh at a memory like that? But sometimes, in the darkest places, your brain does something strange. It laughs not because anything is funny, but because the alternative is to come completely apart. And I was trying so hard not to come apart. I replayed his words constantly, searching through them like someone digging through rubble for something salvageable. Looking for logic, for reason, for some explanation that would make them hurt less. But there is no version of those words that makes them hurt less. I know that now. Cruelty doesn't come with a manual. It doesn't explain itself. It just lands, and then you're left deciding what to do with the wreckage. About a week after I left, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I had stopped answering numbers I didn't recognize because grief makes you want to disappear a little, to shrink away from anything that demands something of you. But something made me pick up. Maybe desperation. Maybe instinct. Maybe my mother, reaching back across whatever impossible distance death creates, and giving me a gentle nudge. The voice on the other end was calm and measured. A man who introduced himself as my mother's lawyer. My mother's lawyer. I had not known she had one. I had not known there was anything left to know. My father had spoken with such absolute authority, such complete certainty, that it had never occurred to me to question the story he had told. He had walked into that study and rewritten reality, and I had believed him because I was 25 years old and freshly heartbroken, and the world had not yet taught me to look for the documents behind the declarations. The lawyer asked if I could come into his office. I almost said no. Even thinking about it now, I want to reach back in time and pull that younger version of me forward. Tell her go. Go right now. Run if you have to. I went. The office was quiet in the way that important rooms often are, carpeted and warm with afternoon light slanting through tall windows. The lawyer was older, with the kind of face that has seen too many families at their worst and somehow remained compassionate anyway. He gestured to a chair and I sat, clutching my bag like a shield, waiting for whatever additional devastation had summoned me here. He studied me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then slowly a soft sound escaped him. Not mockery, not pity, something closer to genuine, quiet astonishment. And then he asked me a question that made the room feel like it was tilting on its axis. "Sophia," he said, "did you even read the will?" The will. There was a will. My father had stood in that study, had slid that folder across the desk, had spoken about ownership and control and $33 million, and not once, not for a single second, had he mentioned that there was a will. I felt something strange happening inside my chest, a mixture of things I couldn't separate. Hope and dread arriving at exactly the same moment, tangled together, impossible to tell apart. The lawyer turned the document toward me across the desk. Thick paper, clean formal typing, and at the bottom my mother's signature, written in the looping, slightly left-leaning hand I had loved my entire life. He placed his finger on a paragraph near the middle of the page. "Read that," he said quietly. I read it. Then I read it again. Then a third time, because the first two times my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. "I want you to stay right here with me. I want you to press play on the next part, because what that document said, it is going to change everything you think you know about this story. Hold on. Stay close. This is where everything turns. If this story is reaching you, if you've ever been dismissed by someone who was supposed to love you, if you've ever stood in a hallway wondering how your family became strangers, drop a heart in the comments. You don't have to say a word. Just let me know you're here. Welcome back. If you've been here from the beginning, thank you. If you're just finding this story, start at part 1. You'll understand why, in a moment, this part matters so much. My hands were trembling. Not the subtle, polite kind of trembling that people describe in books. The real kind. The kind where your fingers won't stay still, and the paper in your hand shivers like something alive. The lawyer sat quietly across from me, and I was grateful beyond words for his silence, because I needed every ounce of concentration. I had to understand what I was reading. My mother had written a will. Not a hasty, last-minute document scraped together in a hospital room. A deliberate, carefully constructed, legally precise will. The kind that tells you everything you need to know about the person who wrote it. About what they feared. About what they loved. About what they were quietly, methodically protecting all along. The house, my family home, the yellow front door and the Sunday morning kitchen and the staircase where she waited for me, was not my father's. It never had been. It had been placed, along with the majority of the estate, into a trust. A trust designated for me. Not handed over recklessly. Not given without protection. Structured and secured and written in language so precise it left no room for manipulation. My mother hadn't just left me an inheritance. She had left me a fortress. Oh, but the clause. The clause that made me press my hand flat against the desk to stop the room from spinning. My father could remain in the house. He was permitted to stay. But only under one condition. He had to continue providing for my well-being. My residence. My security. Any attempt to remove me, intimidate me, pressure me, or deny my rights as the trust's beneficiary would trigger immediate forfeiture of his own access to the estate. She had written it in. She had actually written it in. My mother, who had made burnt pancakes and sung off-key and kept her reading glasses on the nightstand, had also, somewhere in the quiet spaces I never saw, sat down and thought through every possible way I could be hurt. And she had written a wall around each one. I looked up from the document and the lawyer was watching me with that same quiet expression. And I couldn't hold it anymore. I couldn't. Something broke open in me right there in that office, in that carpeted, afternoon-lit room, and I started to cry. Not the gasping doorway tears from the night I left. Something different. Something that came from deeper down, from a place I hadn't even known was holding so much. Because she knew. She had known. She had understood something about my father that I, in my desperate need to believe in my family, had spent years refusing to see. And rather than simply hoping for the best, rather than trusting love to protect what love alone could not protect, she had acted. Quietly, deliberately, without ever telling me, because telling me might have changed things, might have created conflict before it was necessary. She had prepared for a world without her in it, and she had made sure I would not be left undefended. The lawyer's voice reached me through the tears. Legally speaking, he said, your father's actions have consequences. Consequences. Such a small word. Such a precise, devastating word. I wiped my eyes and sat up straighter, and something shifted inside me then. Not rage, not triumph. Something quieter and more determined than either. The thing that happens when you realize for the first time that you are not as powerless as you were made to feel. What happens now? I asked. Now, he said, folding his hands on the desk, we make sure the terms of this will are enforced. The days that followed moved in a strange blur of paperwork and phone calls and formal letters I never imagined I would need to understand at 25 years old. Notices were drafted. Violations were documented. Every word my father had spoken in that study, every dismissal, every declaration of ownership, every cold instruction to find somewhere else to live, all of it became relevant. All of it was now evidence. And my father, the man who had sat behind his desk with the absolute confidence of someone who had already won, received a call. I wasn't there. I want you to know that. This is not a story about wanting him to suffer. I was not sitting somewhere celebrating. I was in a borrowed room, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the fact that my mother had loved me precisely enough to think 10 steps ahead of the worst version of my life. But I was told about it later. I was told that when the lawyer's call reached him, when the language of the will and the consequences of his actions were laid out clearly, unhurriedly, and without any possible misinterpretation, the color drained completely from his face. That man who had sat across from his grieving daughter and spoken about ownership. That man who had waved away my words like I was nothing. That man who had told me without blinking that my mother wasn't here to protect me anymore. He went pale. And isn't that something? Don't go anywhere. Because the next part is where I walk back through that yellow front door. And I need you to be with me for that. Comment below and tell me, did you see this coming? Were you rooting for Sofia from the beginning? Tell me in the comments what you're feeling right now because I want to read every single one. I stood outside the house for a long time before I went in. A long time. More than was probably necessary. But I needed that moment. I needed to stand on the pavement and look at the yellow front door, my mother's yellow, hope-colored front door, and let the reality settle over me slowly enough that it didn't knock me down. I was going home. Not crawling back. Not begging. Not arriving with my tail between my legs hoping for some mercy that was never going to come. I was returning as what I had always been, even when someone with authority had tried to tell me otherwise. I was returning as my mother's daughter, as the person she had thought of and planned for and protected, as the rightful beneficiary of everything she had built with her hands and her years and her love. That word, rightful, still felt strange in my mouth. Victory is supposed to taste like something, isn't it? Like relief or triumph, or at the very least like justice arriving at the right moment and making everything balance out. But walking toward that door, I didn't feel victorious. I felt like someone who had survived a storm and was standing in the aftermath, looking at the changed landscape, not sure yet how to process the damage. I thought about her the whole walk up that path. I thought about her laughing in the kitchen with flour on her hands. I thought about her voice reading to me on winter evenings. I thought about the way she always knew without me saying a single word when something was wrong. She had that particular kind of maternal intelligence that bypasses language entirely and simply sees you. Really sees you. And she had used that intelligence not just to love me, but to protect me even from a place I couldn't reach. Oh, Mama. I pushed open the yellow door. My father was in the hallway. He was standing very still, very straight, the way people stand when they are trying to project authority they no longer possess. But authority is a fragile thing when the documents behind it have been turned inside out. And whatever composure he was attempting, it cracked almost immediately when I met his eyes. He looked different. I don't mean older, though he did look that too. I mean smaller. Not in a physical sense. In the way that a person looks when the story they told about themselves, the story of being powerful and untouchable and in complete control, has been dismantled and they haven't yet figured out who they are without it. He tried to speak. He began to arrange words in the way people do when they are searching for any available combination that might recover lost ground. But the ground was gone. The law had taken it quietly and efficiently, and without the slightest interest in his version of events. I didn't yell at him. I want you to know that because I think people expect a scene at this point. A confrontation. Tears and accusations and voices raised to fill every corner of that house. But that's not what happened. What happened was silence. A particular kind of silence that exists only between people who are suddenly seeing each other without any of the masks, without the roles they had always played, without the comfortable distance of pretense. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I walked past him, into the kitchen where the walls still remembered every laugh, into the living room where her books were still on the shelf, up the staircase where she used to wait. I walked through that house like someone reclaiming territory that had briefly been occupied by something foreign and cold, and I let every room give it back to me. The legal proceedings were swift in the way that clear-cut cases tend to be swift. Violations had been documented. Conditions had been breached in ways that left no room for debate. My father's attempts to reclaim narrative control, to reframe his actions, to position himself as reasonable within a situation he had created entirely through unreasonableness, collapsed one by one under the weight of documented fact. Watching it unfold was surreal. Not dramatic. Just final. This wasn't revenge. I need you to hear that. This was not a story about wanting to destroy him. It was a story about accountability. About a legal system doing precisely what it exists to do. Upholding the documented wishes of a woman who was no longer here to speak for herself, but whose voice remained clear and undeniable in the pages she had left behind. My father eventually moved out. His presence in that house, which had once felt so immovable, so permanently woven into the structure of the place, simply diminished. And then it was gone. He moved into the smaller property, and the family home, my mother's home, my home, settled back into itself. The rooms breathed differently without him there. Or maybe I just breathed differently. Maybe that was it all along. I put her reading glasses back on the nightstand where they belonged. I found her novel and set it on the bedside table with the bookmark still in place. I made hot chocolate on a rainy evening and sat in the kitchen and talked to her the way you talk to people who aren't there anymore, out loud, a little foolishly, a lot desperately. I told her it was okay. I told her I was okay. And I think she knew. I think she wrote that will with the certainty that one day I would be sitting in that kitchen, hot chocolate in hand, and I would understand that her final act was not about money or property at all. It was about making sure I knew I was worth protecting. Hang on. Don't leave yet. Because part 5 is where I tell you what all of this taught me. And it's the part that might matter most of all. If this story has moved you, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that cruelty doesn't always win. Share it with someone who has ever been made to feel disposable. Share it with someone who needs reminding that the people who love us sometimes protect us in ways we never even see. I have been sitting with this story for a long time now. Long enough to stop replaying it like a wound. Long enough to start seeing it like a lesson. Long enough to understand that the things that break us open are sometimes, not always, not easily, but sometimes also the things that show us what we are made of. I will not tell you that I have forgiven my father. That would be dishonest, and you have stayed with me this long, so I owe you nothing but honesty. Forgiveness is complicated. It doesn't move in a straight line. It doesn't arrive on schedule. And real life, unlike the stories we tell ourselves about how things should go, doesn't tie itself up with a neat bow and a reconciliation scene and a final embrace where everything that was broken gets miraculously healed. What I have is something different from forgiveness. I have understanding. Not of his actions. I don't understand those. I don't think I ever will, not fully. How a man looks at his grieving daughter and chooses cruelty is a thing I have made peace with not understanding. But I understand something else now. I understand that my mother knew him in ways that I, in my love for the family I wanted us to be, had refused to see. And I understand that her knowing, her quiet, clear-eyed, unflinching knowing, was the greatest act of love she ever performed for me. She didn't just leave me money. She left me a message written in legal language but meant entirely from my heart. Said, I see you. I know the world can be hard and people can disappoint you, and love alone is not always enough to keep you safe. And so I did the one thing I could do. I made sure that even in my absence you would have somewhere to stand. I stood there in the kitchen with her green scarf folded on the counter and a cup of tea going cold in my hands, and I talked to her again. Ah, Mama, I said. I hope you knew how much I needed that. And I believe she did. I believe she folded that knowledge carefully into every clause of that document, the way she used to fold notes into my school lunches. Small and easy to miss and absolutely everything. The house is different now. Not just because he is no longer in it. Because I am different. I walk through the rooms and I don't see the places where I hurt. I see the places where she lived. I see the kitchen. I see the staircase. I see the yellow front door that she painted with her own hands one summer afternoon while I sat on the porch steps complaining it was too bright, and she laughed that full, unself-conscious laugh she had, and said some things are supposed to be loud about hope. I am learning to be loud about hope. Not naively. Not without awareness of how quickly things can fall apart. But intentionally. Deliberately. The way she was. I've thought a lot about why I'm telling you this story. And the honest answer is that I needed to. I needed to say it out loud and have someone hear it. Not to perform grief or wrap it in the aesthetics of a comeback story. But because there is something uniquely powerful about the act of speaking a hard truth and having it witnessed. Something that makes the truth feel more solid beneath your feet. And because I deeply suspect that some of you listening to this have a story of your own. A moment when someone who was supposed to love you chose otherwise. A moment when you were made to feel like a burden, a loose end, and inconvenience. A moment when you packed your life into whatever could hold it, and stepped out into uncertainty with no clear idea of what came next. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. I mean that with every part of what I've been through. You are not alone. And the people who dismiss you, the people who use your grief as an opportunity, the people who mistake their authority for love and their cruelty for strength, they are not the final word on your story. They are a chapter. A painful, formative, clarifying chapter. But not the ending. My mother taught me that without ever using those words. She taught me by sitting down quietly, probably on an ordinary afternoon with nothing dramatic about it, and writing the truth of what she knew and what she feared and what she loved onto a stack of clean white pages. And then she signed her name in that looping, left-leaning hand. And that signature, that last quiet act, gave me back everything. I still have her green scarf. I wear it sometimes when I need to feel her close. When the house is quiet in the way it gets on winter evenings, and I am sitting with a book I haven't opened yet, and the world outside feels too large and too indifferent for one person to push back against. I put it around my shoulders and it still smells like lavender and something warm I can't quite name. And somehow that is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. To every mother who has ever quietly made sure her child had somewhere to stand. To every daughter who has ever packed her life into 2 suitcases and walked out into the unknown believing, somewhere deep under all the fear, that the truth would eventually surface. To every person who has ever been told by someone who was supposed to love them, that they were not worth protecting. You were always worth protecting. You always will be. And if nobody has said that to you today, consider this my way of saying it. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than I can say. If this story moved you, please share it. Not for the numbers. For the person in your life who needs to hear it. The one you thought of somewhere in the middle of part 2 or part 3. The one whose name came quietly into your mind while you were listening. Send it to them. Let them know that truth has a way of surfacing. That dignity can survive even the harshest betrayal. That a mother's love, written into a legal document on an ordinary afternoon, can reach forward through time and hold her daughter steady when everything else falls away. I'm Sophia. And this is my story.